Hi, welcome to Latinas Uprising. This is a space for Latinas who are interested in getting to and through law school and who want to establish a successful career as new attorneys. I'm Nubia, and I'm here today to talk to you about surviving secondary trauma, otherwise known as vicarious trauma or just trauma in the legal profession. Let's get into it. So I posted a funny video on TikTok that joked about how Latinas choose the legal profession or the legal practice that sort of traumatized them as children. So that's why there's so many of us that go into immigration law or family law or criminal defense, because those are often the systems that really sort of inflicted themselves on our family and our communities. And But a lot of them are like, yeah, that's right. Like, that's why I decided to go into law school, and that's why I pursued a career in the law, because of the situation that happened when I was growing up. So the video was, all in good fun, but there was also a lot of folks who were like, I started down that track, but being exposed to that constantly or just being re-traumatized over and over again was just too much for me, and they chose to do something else. And so the first lesson I think there is that you can do anything with a law degree. You do not have to feel limited to doing just the things that you sort of have exposure to, especially if you don't have a lot of exposure to the legal field. And I think when you're in law school, you really get exposed to all types of different areas of the law. I honestly think that's how tax lawyers are made, because no one goes into law school wanting to be a tax attorney. So it's really important that you just keep an open mind. But what I want to talk about in this video is that exposure to trauma, that secondary trauma or the vicarious trauma that we as attorneys experience that often isn't talked about, and how do you cope? So when I first started practicing law, I worked at a legal aid, and all of my clients were survivors of domestic violence, of gender-based violence, or other types of harassments and serious violent crimes. I had also had a very turbulent childhood growing up, so this was very akin to things I had experienced, and it was a constant sort of issue being exposed to these sorts of things all the time. And I recognized, thankfully, early on that I was going to have to do something to sort of mitigate the exposure so that I could continue to do this work for as long as I could. And I actually ended up working there for almost a decade. I was there 9 years. I would have stayed there even longer, but another opportunity came by. But I really love the work I was able to succeed, because I did find some ways to mitigate some of that trauma, and I want to share with you what I was able to do to make things a little bit more digestible for me. So number one, and what really was just a matter of lucky timing, is that when I first started practicing, there was this shift in the school of thought in the legal profession that started recognizing vicarious trauma. Before then, it was very unusual for legal professionals to recognize and address the trauma that we are exposed to. And this is one of the reasons why our profession has really high rates of depression, of alcohol abuse, of narcotic abuse, because we are depressed and we try to self-medicate. And so being able to discuss the trauma that we are exposed to and the abuse that sometimes we go through was really a pivotal moment in how this profession was shifting. And so I was really lucky that being in a legal aid, which is a little bit more, granola-y, that we were able to recognize, and we were told right off the bat, like, you will be traumatized. Like, there's no two ways about it. It's not because you're not strong or whatever. And you have to recognize it. You have to recognize your triggers. You have to figure out your coping mechanisms. And so because of those warnings and that support, I had this mindset going into my career that I needed to be aware of how certain things were impacting me. And that allowed me to create healthy coping mechanisms, avoid the unhealthy ones, create some creative outlet. And I think if we had not had this shift in mindset as a career, which still has not gone 100%, there are still people who will not recognize vicarious trauma, who think that you're weak if you are, impacted by the things that you're exposed to. But clearly, like, there's something that's eating up this profession, because our rates of depression and our mental health and stress is just so high. But I think it's really important going into your career, or whatever point you are in your career, to recognize that regardless of what you practice, you are going to be exposed to people who are in the worst moments of their life, who may take it out on you, or who might expose you to really traumatic things. And that's going to impact you just as a human being. And it's not because you're too weak or because you need to toughen up. You have to recognize it. You have to think about some healthy coping mechanisms so that you can pull on those the moment you recognize that you're being triggered. And that's just a really important tool to have in this profession. The second thing that I did that really helped me maintain a really level sort of mindset when I was working is that I try to limit exposure to trauma from my clients to me as much as possible. What I mean by that is, remember, I was representing survivors of domestic violence, of other types of assaults, and oftentimes they had to write statements or they had to tell me that they were survivors and had to give me some details. And I knew that I could not, day in and day out, read and listen to and hear descriptions of really horrific events without it impacting me in a serious way. Knowing this, I came up with some sort of tools and tricks for me to limit the amount of information my clients gave me. So if my client came to me and they told me that they were a survivor of domestic violence, I didn't make them prove it to me by telling me as much details as possible. I had clients who sometimes weren't sure that they were survivors of domestic violence, and so I had to ask them questions, but I would limit the ways that I would ask them questions. I wouldn't tell them, tell me the worst time that your partner ever beat you up and tell me exactly what happened. I didn't need to hear it in that details, but I would instead, I had a checklist and I would say, has your partner ever pushed you? That's a yes or no question. Did they ever pull your hair? Did they ever destroy your property? Did they ever call you names? And so the client, for their own benefit, didn't have to tell me all these crazy descriptions, and I didn't have to hear them. And if my client told me, yes, they pulled my hair, yes, they called me names, yes, they destroyed my property, we'll get into the details later, but for now, that's enough. And so I was able to come up with some of these sort of workarounds so that I did not have to be exposed to such detailed, descriptive forms of abuse day in and day out. And for me, I think that really helped me because it allowed me to not to have all these visions in my head 24/7, which is ultimately what happens. I was also very lucky that I worked in immigration. The standard of proof is much lower compared to if my clients had to go give testimony in court. So my level of needing to know certain information wasn't as high as others. So that really helped me as well. So you will have to adjust it, but it is helpful if you can find ways to sort of limit exposure to yourself in a way that you're still representing your client appropriately. That will help you in the long run. And finally, the third thing that I did was treat my client like a client and like I was the attorney and not necessarily their friend, or more importantly, their savior. When you are in legal aid especially, or when you are working with survivors or clients who come from marginalized communities, it is very typical for attorneys to turn on this Superman mode. You are here, you're going to defend your client, you're going to go into hell and battle for them, and that's great. We're supposed to, represent them zealously. But there is a line that I think, especially in legal aid and public interest, gets blurred. And it was really difficult, I would say, for certain attorneys who could not create appropriate boundaries with their clients. And so then the clients would become dependent on them to kind of help them with lots of things outside of their normal cases. That would overwhelm them because they were doing that same type of service or trying to with all of their clients. And that's just not tenable for the long run. It's going to burn you out, and it's not helpful for the client either. So for me, it was really important that I viewed my clients, as adult women. Most of them were women and most of them were adults, as adult women who were capable of doing everything that I was capable of doing. Obviously, if some of my clients need a little bit of help, I would provide that support, but I did not think asking them to figure out how to fax me something or going to the Social Security office, I wanted them to feel empowered to go do that and not need me to go with them. And I would often see a lot of colleagues who felt like they needed to go with their client because I think they felt really bad about the client situation. They knew that the client would probably have to deal with, unprofessional or unhelpful people at these other spaces, and they wanted to sort of defend them. And I totally get that. I also wanted to defend my clients and help them, but I understood that there was only a limited amount of what I could do, what I could focus on, and I could not give every single client 110%. And so it wasn't fair that I would give 110% to just one client and then sort of let my other clients flail in the wind. I understood that I had to have that sort of limitation and that boundary. And I think it's really important, again, because especially in public service, public interest, those lines tend to get really blurred, and suddenly clients are dependent on you because you are often their avenue to everything, right? You're the attorney. You're gonna know, hey, my paycheck didn't come through. Hey, say my son's trying to apply for unemployment, or like there's an issue with FAFSA, my son can't get it, whatever. And there are some things you can help them with, but not everything is going to land on you. But again, there is this sometimes feelings and tendency for public service attorneys, public interest attorneys to sort of take on the savior cap. And I'm going to really encourage folks to reconsider that approach, to assess how they are treating their clients, and to really analyze whether or not that's to their benefit and to your own long-term benefit as well. Because I think the better you are at creating boundaries for both your clients and yourself, the better and longer your career can flourish. Does that mean that I didn't become friends with my clients? No, I actually am not their friends. They don't have my number. They can't call me. I don't go to them. I know there's lots of attorneys who do create that sort of camaraderie with them, and they do, and they, especially if cases are very serious or are very long term, and I'm not passing any judgment on that. I just felt it was really important for me to have these boundaries because I had a very active caseload and I needed to be able to give my all to every single one of my clients. I felt that that was only fair. Now, if I see my clients out in the street and they recognize me and they're comfortable with me saying hi, because obviously I don't want to, reveal that I'm their attorney without their permission, absolutely. I'm so pleased and I'm always so happy to see them, and it's just always such a treat because I get to see how they've progressed in their life, and that's always just like a really exciting moment, and I get to hear about their kids and all of that. So I don't want it to seem like I was a robot and I was like, I'm just an attorney and you're just a client. Like, obviously you're still going to have a personal skill and work with them and talk to them like they're human beings. But I think for me, again, it's just really important that that relationship stayed as neutral and as professional as possible, because ultimately, while these clients are going through a really rough spot, they are still adults. They're still capable. They are still going to live their life without you, and you have to be cognizant of that. So those are the three things that really help me maintain a long career in public service and exposure to really serious trauma. So again, I recognized that I was going to be traumatized and identified my triggers and my coping mechanisms as soon as I could. I created some mechanisms to limit exposure to trauma as much as I could while still representing my clients appropriately. And then I also maintained boundaries with my clients as much as I could, because that really felt and that was appropriate for me. So those are the three things that helped me create a really long-term career in public interest. And if you're in public interest, or if you're doing work that's exposing you to trauma or trauma that you experienced when you were younger, it's important that you create those mechanisms and tools for yourself as well. So I hope this was helpful. I hope it gave you an idea of how you can maintain a long-term career. If you have any questions about secondary trauma, vicarious trauma, if you have any questions about a career in the law, please let me know in the comments below. Make sure that you're liking, subscribing, that you're following. Share this with your favorite Latina, and I will see you in the next video.